this story is long. Is sometimes my wife asks me to explain something that I've done, and I say, well, it's a long story, but not a good one. Um, and so it's a story that's, I guess, important to me. It is. I've learned that we are our stories. Like we are a present kind of accumulation of the things that happen to us. And as long as our stories aren't over, we get to continue growing. And so I'll kind of bring you up to where my story is so far, and happy to take questions later on when we do Q&A, but I want to make sure we have plenty of time for these gentlemen's stories as well. I will say, and many people in the community know my story, I was not born into a Jewish family. I came along kind of mixed Protestant, as it were. My father was from a Baptist tradition, specifically a Southern Baptist tradition. My mother, when he met my mother, she was going to a Lutheran church, and so the Lutheran church won out, and I was baptized Lutheran. Later on, we moved to this was in a small town in rural East Texas. Later on, we moved to an even smaller town in rural West Virginia that didn't have a Lutheran church, so we became Methodists. And that was my upbringing. I was kind of a cultural Christian, if you will. In these small towns, the church was always a focal point of social life. And let's see, we get some chat here. There's no video. Hopefully it'll come through. So the church was always kind of a focal point of our social life. A lot of my friends from school went to church. A lot of my parents' coworkers went to church. And so that was what we did. And I went through all the youth group stuff, and went through confirmation, noticed different kinds of different ways of doing church, as it were, like the diversity within Protestantism of things like, who takes confirmation, who takes communion, is it wine, is it grape juice, is it wafers, is it bread? So that was an early introduction to the diversity of religion. Let's see, we've got some chatter. You could try toggling back speaker view and gallery view, and maybe that helps with some of the video stuff going on. So I'll say that this is kind of how I was raised, and then I caught into it in a social and way, just to be with my friends. But I always felt that there was something that didn't quite stick. That this was something that was a part of the fabric, but when people started talking about the tenets of belief, I had a hard time with, I guess, some of the more mysterious aspects that people were talking about, the things that we were taking for granted, and also and I'll say this has more to do with the culture that I was a part of than Christianity per se. But being in the South, there were some cultural biases that I wasn't, just didn't feel right to me. And I always and there were things that had to do with, I grew up in places that were segregated, frankly. I went to a segregated elementary school in the 1980s, if not de jure, then certainly de facto. When I moved to West Virginia, there was maybe one Black family and one Jewish family in my whole town. And so this part of the culture was not distinct from the Christian culture that I was a part of. And so I thought that they were somehow interwoven. So that colored my view of religion, frankly. And by the time I was in high school, I stayed active in youth group stuff, but for me, it was very much social. And I would often joke that I was into youth group for the cookies mostly, and for the trips off campus and for things like that. But by the time I was independent, I very much considered myself a skeptical atheist. And it was only into college when I met a Jewish girl that I started taking a second look at a religious tradition. And even still, it was more, I was learning about the cultural aspects of it, but I was mostly interested in her and the life that we were, envisioning building together. And when we got married, she didn't insist that I converted, and her family didn't insist that I converted, because per our tradition, any children that we have would be Jewish according to Jewish guidelines. And as long as I agreed that the children would be raised Jewish, that was fine with everybody. And I thought, okay, well, kids need a thing. she feels more strongly about her thing than I feel about my thing. We were young and we really needed a people to help raise our kids. And so I went along with it. And it was only later when my oldest, who's now 24, was about 4 or 5 years old, went to the synagogue preschool and was learning rituals, was learning practices, was learning the stories of our tradition, was asking me questions. I thought, just to be a competent father, I should take a class to see, okay, what is this stuff? Because I want to help, even though this isn't mine, I want to help raise him as a responsible father. So I should learn what's going on. But there's no way that I could be Jewish because I didn't consider myself a religious person. So I took a class. And by class, I mean, it was 2 couples in the rabbi's study every month for a year. It was more like a book club where we were learning about Judaism and the holidays and things like that. And at the very end of it, I have to say I had fallen in love, not just with her. That was old news at that point. But um, what I could say is that I fell in love with a culture that, and I use the word culture advisedly, a culture that didn't pretend to give me the big answers, but had a long tradition of vocabulary of asking the big questions. And that let me ask questions in ways that the church that I was brought up in didn't seem friendly to asking questions. And again, this isn't a blanket statement about Christianity, just the culture that I was in. And so I thought, well, I love everything about this, but my problem is I don't believe in God. And my wife at the time said, that's okay, a lot of us don't. And so I thought, well, jackpot, maybe this is for me. And so I talked to my rabbi. I went through the process, went to see a panel of 3 rabbis who asked me lots of questions, asked me what I thought about things, asked me about my sincerity and my loyalty to the people, but did not once ask me whether I believed in God. And at the end of the day, they just asked me, bad things happen to us from time to time. When it happens again, where will you stand? And I said, I have 2 sons. There's no question where I'm going to stand. And they said, that's good enough for us. And so I came through into Judaism out of sort of cultural solidarity, out of family connection. And it was only later that that big question changed. And through my studies, through getting involved in the Jewish community, again, mostly out of social and educational needs, I began to witness a God that I could believe in, I think is the best way that I could put it. I began to hear writings, read writings and hear stories from rabbis who were similar, and regular Jews who were similarly challenged, who could face we've got theodicy too from my ecclesiastical friends. We've got the problem of evil too. How can I believe in an all-powerful God that would allow something like the Holocaust to happen? Or if you can believe the Holocaust is just a massive failure of free will, how can you then let a God off the hook for, let's say, pediatric cancer and things like that? And I had a teacher who gave me the insight that God isn't in the business of making us cry. I believe in a God that's in the business of crying with us and teaching us to cry with each other, but also celebrate with each other. A God of grace and forgiveness, high expectations, but infinite patience. And so that's what kind of opened the door to me. It was a cultural journey out of faith into culture, into faith. And later on, I took it ridiculously too far and decided to go to seminary. And one of the questions that Gail had asked me, and I'm trying to be respectful of time here, was how my family dealt with this. And I'll say at first, my family was happy to see me getting out of trouble. Was happy to say, well, at least he's got a path that he's on now. And it was only years after I converted that one time my parents, and I don't know if anybody has a family that fights about stuff. So, but if you do, tell the other people. But we were having one of these big family kitchen sink fights, like everything that anybody had ever said or done that anybody was mad about, we were griping about it. And then about 20 minutes in, my dad said, by the way, we weren't crazy about it when you converted to Judaism. And I thought, well, now you tell me. And so a couple of years after that, when I decided that the right path for me, I switched careers. I was in financial analysis and computer programming, and I decided to pursue, I guess, a life of service and learning and teaching. And then I thought, well, my rabbi has that job. I'll give that a try. So when I decided that I wanted to go to seminary, I thought, well, if they didn't like me being Jewish, they're going to hate this. And um, the funny thing was that, I mean, it's funny now because I knew I had to move from Minneapolis to one of the cities on the coast because that's where seminary was. And so I had to call them and let them know why we had a change of address. So, but I thought that calling my parents and telling them that I was going to seminary to become a rabbi might be the last conversation I ever had with them. And I was shocked would be a mild word for when I heard my father's voice say, "That's amazing, John. Wait till I tell your mother." She's taking a nap, but when she gets up, I'll tell her. And then I get a call from my mother. My mother was a sweet East Texas accent. "Well, my stars, I just think that's so wonderful that you're doing that." And I think for them, what it made me realize is that for parents, you want your children to love what you love because you want them to have the same joy in your life that you have had. And when children don't love what you love, it feels like a rejection. But if they see that it's good for you, and I've had to see some of this stuff in my kids too, if they see that it's good for you, their love for you outweighs their love for their own past. And that can supersede. What I didn't mention was that my father, before he was a college professor, was a Southern Baptist minister. So I am fourth generation in the family business, just a different franchise now. And so the funny thing was, once I went to seminary, my father and I never had more to talk about because we just talked about the Bible and the book of Job all the time. And once I graduated and became a rabbi, now my dad and I just talk about church politics. So, so it's actually made me closer to my family in a way. And so that's my story in a nutshell for the time that we have. And I want to make sure I hear these gentlemen's story as well. I'm happy to take questions about it on the back end.
Alan, why don't you go ahead?
Well, thank you, Reverend. Well, again, I'm Alan Edson, and I will open the greeting of peace to all of you. Assalamu alaikum. I came about Islam in a real interesting way. One of my friends is on the call this evening, so he was there with me at the time that I kind of got touched. But I went to my 20th year high school reunion and had a marvelous time. I think I stayed awake for the whole 3 days of the weekend. But one of my classmates won a Pulitzer Prize. Another one of my classmates won a TV Emmy. And I had known these guys since junior high school. And it dawned on me that I was underachieving. And I needed to do something about that. And so I went to high school here in Pasadena. When I returned home to Oakland, I just started trying to find out what moves I was going to make. And so I knew a few Muslims when I was in college. They were Persian. And I really liked the way they composed themselves. And so I, started reading the Quran. I didn't really get any understanding from it then, but I liked the way it flowed and how it read. So when I got back to Oakland, I, said I got to do something different. So I went to the Yellow Pages, and there were about 6 mosques in Oakland, and I drove by every one of them. Some of them were storefronts. One was a real large mosque, and I decided to. They had a marquee in front of their mosque that said they were offering prayer classes every Monday. So I showed up there on Monday. And if you know anything about the Black church, it's always about nice cars, nice clothes. And so at the time, the imam showed up. He on a 3/4 length overcoat with a red apple hat, driving a BMW. And I just wondered to myself, oh, wow, this is going to be like a different version of church. So, I waited for the class to start, and, I just started to feel differently. And I kept going back to church, to the prayer classes, and, it became more and more familiar, but I was also feeling better and better. I'd go to Friday prayer. I wouldn't, get on the floor to pray. But I would just listen to the khutbah, or the talk for that day. And so I went about, my class reunion was in July. In October of 1991, I had converted to Islam. And it all just jumped off from there. I stayed involved with some of the brothers at the mosque. And one of the brothers had started a nonprofit organization. And the organization was formed to develop housing. I said, wow, this is exciting. This is something I might be able to get behind. And so I joined the group. We never did really get involved in housing to the degree that we had planned. But, as we were doing that and working on that, we came across a contaminated park in East Oakland. And we were the organization that got the city of Oakland to clean the park up, along with the Environmental Protection Agency. And it was just a really kind of connecting dot things about the skills that I had developed over the years, played a part in activism. And this was at the advent of the environmental justice movement. This was at the time that President Bill Clinton signed an executive order for environmental justice. And that was that moment in time that I really started to understand how everything was political. The city of Oakland didn't want to clean the park to the level that was really health and safety for the community. But we got the other organizations, the EPA particularly, to really do a full cleanup. Not only did we get the park cleaned up, we were able to get 29 private properties cleaned up. And we got 625 children at an adjacent elementary school blood lead tested. And in middle school, we started an environmental science program. And so, at this moment, things just started coming together for me in a really major way. And because, we were successful in our work on getting the park cleaned up, I got famous. And so I was invited to talk all over the country about the things that we did to be successful. And then, again, I kept, practicing my deen, our way of life of Islam. I got married. I have 3 children. I've got Ishmael, Khalil, and Nadira. And it's interesting, my wife and I were older parents. And so when Abraham had his first son, he was an old parent. So we named my son Ishmael. Khalil means friend. And Abraham was a friend of God. And so that's why we called him, named him Khalil. And my daughter is Nadira, which is rare and precious. And so, I really got into, the way of life, being a dad, and this environmental justice work. My background is economic. A lot of these sites and situations and conditions are in underserved African-American minority communities. And the cleanup takes place, people from outside, they come in and get all the money and take it out of the community. There's no reinvestment. And so I met a friend of mine in San Francisco. He and I, we hooked up with a principal engineer, and we started our own environmental cleanup company. And we did that for 8 years. We were quite successful. Uh, but at the time, all these things that were happening, I could see the hand of God involved in that. And, the blessings is pouring out to me. And it became shaped my life. In 2002, I made my Hajj to Mecca, Saudi Arabia. It was a very, powerful experience. The first thing, it's not a vacation. And it was a lot of rigor involved. But we spent a week at the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. And then we spent a week at the Prophet's Mosque in Medina. So that was a very beautiful experience. The real main thing was the people. There were people from all over the world. And nobody that I met believed that I was an American. They thought I was either from South Africa, India, Ethiopia, but nothing to do with America. So that was kind of my segue into meeting a whole lot of different people. And people from all over the world. And it was just a very powerful, just powerful. When we arrived, we do Umrah, which is a abbreviated Hajj. You make 7 circuits of the Kaaba, and you go between the 2 mountains, and so I have claustrophobia. And so I saw all these people, and it's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to maintain inside, because the Kaaba is inside a bigger mosque. And, I walked up to the door, and it's like, oh, I can't make it. And then got inside, and it was just wonderful. So I completed my Umrah and just began to learn about people and things. And, you see people from all over, from, every level of society at Hajj. A lot of the room to pray is on the roof, and they have an escalator that goes to the roof. And there was a Bedouin woman that didn't have an escalator. And she looked at it and tried to figure out what to do, and she finally just jumped on. And then you had people, doctors and lawyers and politicians from all over the world that were there. And so, after we did our rites of Hajj, we come back, and then you make a final tawaf, and you leave. And when I left, when I was leaving, the thought came to me that, Alan, little old boy from Pasadena, you can do anything you want to in the whole world. And, since then, that's what I've been trying to accomplish. I don't know if you are familiar with halal. Halal, H-A-L-A-L. Halal is to Muslims what kosher is to Jews. And halal has turned into more than just food. And my business pursuits now are into the halal industry. And I see great possibilities with that. Islam has also prepared me to, I prepared a body for burial. I've slaughtered an animal. I didn't have to. It was probably one of the most scary things ever, but I was to deliver a baby. And so these things that are necessary things in life, I've been able to accomplish. And, there may be a moment in time where we may have to be able to use these skills and talents. And so, activism has been my kind of path on my journey. And I really found that, my thing has been the ability to help people and to serve. But as I'm growing, I'm all expanding. And I can thank, Rabbi Carrier. He allowed me to do a Shabbat service. Uh, Very, very meaningful for me personally, but also a very, very powerful thing. It's a great responsibility, to have a congregation following. And I know you brothers feel the same way. I mean, every Sunday, and how difficult it is and the responsibility. And so, yeah, I'm just happy and pleased at how I've been growing and developing as a man and a person. And I think I'm adding value to the universe.
Well, I'll jump in quickly and apologize. Most of my All Saints folks have heard this story before, so bear with me. And just sort of hit a couple just highlights. So I'm sitting here in my family's house, not the house I grew up in, but it's my dad's house. And reminds me, just even looking around this room, I grew up in a household with two deeply faithful parents who chose different paths. My father was born in England. He was Anglican, Church of England. My mother actually grew up in the Episcopal Church, sort of nominally Episcopalian, but around the early to mid 70s, just as I was growing up, maybe second or third grade, she joined a church called Self-Realization Fellowship, which was founded by Paramahansa Yogananda. One of the big differences between me moving from St. Louis to California is St. Louis, no one had ever heard of it. California, everyone knows what SRF is. And probably from about third or fourth grade through about eighth grade, I would go to meditation group with my mom, and I would go to church with my dad, and I would acolyte. And what my parents modeled for me was that you could have different paths, and you could love and respect each other. And what it was finding what was right for you, finding a sense of call. And there was no sort of mutual exclusivity to it. And there was no sort of sense of competition among them about which I would choose or if I would choose none. My brother basically chose none, and that was fine. And what ended up happening for me was, as much as I loved the mystical part of SRF, I loved thinking of sort of Divine Mother, and I loved the meditation techniques that I learned. And I never became a Kriyaban. I was too young for that. But as I got involved more in the Episcopal Church, what I fell in love with was the sense of community and the sense of service rooted in community. What I fell in love with theologically was the poetry of the incarnation. And I phrase it that way because you say, well, do you believe that Jesus actually was God in human form? I don't know. But the poetry of the incarnation, that our humanity is so sacred that it can house the divine, that God loves us so much that God could not bear to be apart from us. I love that poetry. That poetry rings true to me. And so I tend to not get caught up in what actually really happened. It isn't important to me. And I get that it's important for other folks. And so I don't mean to denigrate that. That part has been a part of my path. It has much more been a part of the poetry of it. And so what I found that I loved was this community, that we were part of this thing called the body of Christ. And that just because my mom was in SRF didn't mean that on some level she wasn't connected too. There were no sort of that sense of, well, you have to be in or you're out. The next big thing that shaped me was I'd gone to seminary, gotten ordained, won't lead you through that story. But I and married an amazing woman who also comes from a split faith household. Her stepfather Ray is Jewish, and was welcomed into that family with also Christian and Jewish traditions. And then I met a dear friend of mine named Becca Stevens, who is an Episcopal priest. Becca founded a community called Thistle Farms in Nashville, and it's a residential community for women who are recovering from prostitution, violence, drug abuse, and sexual exploitation. And it's sort of a mixture of Benedictine spirituality and the best evidence-based social work and 12-step. And what it was a community of people who, as they say, knew they were in the ditch, and they know they've been in the ditch. They know that life has deeply wounded them, and they know that what will heal them is love lived out in community. And so it's this community of people who are trying to heal, and they're bound to each other in this sisterhood for life. And they don't, at best, hide themselves from each other. And it really is that sense of what I believe faith is as its best, which it creates a container where it's safe enough for us to be ourselves, and we can feel love. And so that became my image. And I was doing campus ministry at the time, which really helped. This image of where can we go to just be honest about who we are, and realize that we can love each other deeply and we can be loved deeply. And that can change our lives and that can change the world. Worked for about 3 years running a nonprofit, working all over the world, helping people work on global poverty. And I was changed I went to Southern Sudan, went to Ghana, went to Rwanda, went to South Africa, went to Kenya. And I was changed by the people that I met there. In my language, I would say I met Christ there, in so many powerful ways that I never like to say it humbled me, because when I say it's like I always wonder how humbled I am if I say I'm humbled. And so, but I know it profoundly affected me. And what it helped me realize is when you're in community with someone, that means that what happens to them happens to you. And it is no longer an option to change your life if pieces of your life are adversely affecting them. And certainly I have not lived that anywhere close to perfectly. And left that, became dean of a cathedral in downtown St. Louis. And the next other huge place that happened was particularly the people who were struggling with homelessness who lived around the cathedral. And I realized, if we were going to call these amazing people part of our community, then why were there people in our community we permitted to be homeless and people that we didn't permit to be homeless? Like, I was someone that my community would never permit to be homeless. And there were people who were living on the steps of the community, and we let them be homeless. And then Michael Brown was murdered by Darren Wilson in Ferguson. And I met an amazing group of young people on the streets, and I met an amazing group of faith leaders on the street. And that was another big conversion point for me, because before that, I was someone who was more or less really like dyed-in-the-wool Episcopalian, committed to the Episcopal Church. And that has started a process for me over the last 5 or 6 years, where I actually I love the Episcopal Church. I'm glad to be in the Episcopal Church. That Episcopal identity matters less and less to me. I'm a follower of Jesus. As we say at All Saints Church, we walk with a revolutionary Jesus, and we believe what's revolutionary about Jesus is the open table and love. But mostly what I'm concerned with is being with people who are interested in standing in solidarity and love with people. There was an amazing rabbi in Ferguson, in St. Louis, Susan Talvey, who has just become a dear sister. Tracy Blackman is a UCC priest. James Croft, who worked at a place called the Ethical Center, who's an atheist. It was, who's going to be there when you're arrested, when you get out, or who are you waiting for? Who's going to show up at night when you need them? That's, I realized with these young people on the streets, the 3 words they used over and over again were solidarity, family, and love. And they showed me in new ways what those 3 words meant. And what that changed me, in the same way that it changed me when I traveled in different places in the world, was I said, okay, if we have, Brittany Farrell and Alexis Templeton and Tracy Blackman and Starsky Wilson are saying you're family, then I have to care what happens to them, and it's no longer an option. And I'm blessed enough to say that my faith history is a history of falling in love over and over and over again. It is just the best thing in the world. Everywhere I've gone, I've fallen in love. I've come here in Pasadena, I've fallen in love with the people of All Saints Church. I've fallen in love with the people in other faith communities in Pasadena and this area. And I think I'm so blessed that my faith story is this trail of falling in love and having that expand and not contract. And then for me, it just keeps it keeps coming down to, like, one of our parts of our mission statement is that at All Saints Church, we reverently invite all faiths and peoples into relationship. We had someone who was in our Getting Connected class who was sort of incorporated into All Saints Church today, and she came to All Saints as a Muslim. And one of the great things to be able to say to her is, bring all of that piece of you to All Saints Church, because that's going to shape us. I'm committed to being the best follower of Jesus that I can be. And I can be shaped in that, and our community can be shaped in that by someone who is unsure whether she is supposed to follow Islam or Christianity or something else. And I love being part of a community that is kind of like the house I grew up in, that doesn't have to draw those boundaries of who's in and who's out. just says, how can we help everyone hear the call of the divine in their life? So that's me.
It's really beautiful to hear all of your stories. I'm wondering, before we
Yeah.
open this up to Q&A, if the three of you have questions for one another based on what you've heard. If you want to ask something, Rabbi Carrier or Alan, if you want to speak to each other before we pepper you with
Yes,
questions.
I'd love to, Alan, I'd love to ask you a question, which is, it really struck me when you did your Hajj that no one thought that you were from America. And I'd love it if you could talk a little more about, was that displacing? Like what was that like in terms of your sense of identity?
Well, during the Hajj, 3 million people there.
Right.
And I saw many of my friends there. So, for me, I had this kind of universal appeal that, they've seen me before. And, I was, it's, my lineage, didn't start in America. And so, one of the things, may have been, my home.
Yeah.
So I had a question, actually, because Alan talked about naming the names of his children. And I don't know if this is too personal, Rabbi Carrier, but I know when people go through conversion to Judaism, you choose a name. So I'd love to know, is there a story to what your chosen name is?
Sure. There's a holy story and a less holy story.
Let's hear them both.
I'll start with the holy story. So we do get, when I work with a lot of people who convert, and I say, it's kind of like, it's great, you get to pick a name now. The only other times you get to name stuff are when you have a kid or buy a boat. And so I went through and I thought about the stories that I had learned and the people that I admired, and I picked the name Yitro. And Yitro, also known as Jethro, was the father-in-law of Moses. And he was, part of my career before becoming a rabbi was I was in management consulting, and he was, I like to think of him as the first management consultant, because Moses had just gotten a new job and was now the judge of all these people that he had taken responsibility for. And it was his father-in-law who said, you need to delegate. And so I thought, well, that was a kind of wisdom that I wanted to embody. But also he's considered one of the early converts to Judaism, because he saw what his son-in-law and now his daughter had traveled with these people out of Egypt. And so that really resonated with me. That's the holy piece. The less holy piece was, my sister had always called me Jethro, but not after the biblical character. I'm the big one in my family by like a foot or so. And so she always thought of me as like Jethro Bodine from the Beverly Hillbillies. And anytime I ate, when I would get cereal out of these big soup tureens and things like that, and she called it my Jethro bowl. So part of it was, my kind of an inside joke in my family of being compared to Jethro Bodine of the Clampetts, but also this story of someone who was not a part and had a whole life outside of the Jewish community, but then saw something that compelled him to follow, and that's what stuck with me.
That's beautiful. So we do have a question from our audience, and the question is from Shireen, and she asks, how does your faith help you grow closer with regards to your relationship with God? And I'll leave that to any of the three of you.
I just say my faith is based in community, and where I find God is in other people, and it just is. Again, the techniques of meditation and things like that I use that I got from SRF and sort of continue to use in contemplative prayer, that's wonderful. And that develops sort of a personal sort of feeling of peace and connection. But truthfully, it's the idea of we're in communion and community with each other. That's where I feel love. And I can't imagine That's why I even sort of struggle with calling it my faith. Right? I can't imagine faith without community. So that's where it is for me. It's my community. I'd be lost without it.
Alan or Rabbi Carrier?
You know, for me, you know, it carries over to everything. And now with COVID, you know, thing is being social. And, you know, I learned through people. You know, people come with the answer, the idea. They might not know how to make it work, make it manifest. And so, you know, I'm here as a servant. I'm here to help. And I just believe, you know, that God is involved in everything that I'm doing. I'm driving it somewhere. You know, if I'm here for this, you know, my faith, you know, as long as I keep, you know, standing, living, and breathing air, I've got some purpose, and I'm here just to benefit.
Thank you. Rabbi Carrier?
I'll say I've come a long way in the sense that I told my story of starting out as a kind of a skeptical atheist. Now I'm sort of more fully immersed in this. There's a sort of Jewish polarity when it comes to thinking about God. We have prayers that talk about God's transcendence, which is that quality of the infinite and eternal, but also infinitely distant and inaccessible. But also on the other pole is the immanent God, the God that dwells among us. And the God who is interested and involved in our lives. And if we're in exile, God's in exile with us at the same time. And so I go back and forth. Some days I need the God that is way stronger than I am because I need to borrow some of that strength. And I'm grateful for having that big muscular God, as it were. But some days I appreciate being able to, as Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says, when you pray, you should talk to God like you're talking to a friend. And he means that, I believe, or at least I practice, in all dimensions. Sometimes we talk to our friends when we're embarrassed to talk to anybody else, but we have something that we've got to get off our chest. Sometimes we talk to friends when we are so mad, maybe at that friend or maybe somebody else, but you know, there's that friend that you could talk to where you could just let it all out and say everything that you have to say, whether it's kind or generous or not. And you know that you have the kind of friend who's going to let you get it off your chest, is still going to love you and hug you afterwards, is going to let you cry yourself out. And you know, there's that varies. There's a Hasidic practice of Hibodedut, where you go into the woods and you talk to God where nobody else can hear. And there was a moment where I had a very frustrating time in my life, and my rabbi said to me, "You need to go out and like beat up a tree, and that's your prayer." And I know people have seen this you know, Hulk John side of me, but like there's sometimes where you do need to just let all those emotions out. And for me, God is the strongest vessel of that, and someone, if I could say, that I trust is still going to be in my corner when I've shown who I really am. And so I often compare my personal relationship with God as, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie The Apostle with Robert Duvall, where he's on very familiar terms with Jesus Christ, whether he's happy or sad or yelling. And sometimes sometimes I need the transcendent God, but sometimes I need that intimacy of fellowship as well. And my God's big enough for all of those things.
Like a good friend. So I wanted to ask Carl Selkin, a PJTC member, wrote a really beautiful question. It's a little long, so bear with me. In your experience, you have most likely met fundamentalists of different traditions who reject those who do not express the superiority of their faith. How do you deal with such individuals to share your message?
Just reading the question again.
Okay. It's in the Q&A.
Yeah, I see it. Who not expressive. I part of it for me is I don't feel called to be in the conversion business. And what I can do is I can share where I am on my faith journey and what I believe, and I can be open to what other people are sharing, and I can sort of like if things, again, it is sort of that thing of people's, there are aspects of faith just like any other belief system that can be toxic, and if something is wounding and hurting and oppressing people, then it's something I may need to say, hey, this isn't, sort of that, something called an intent impact conversation. I can say, I don't think this is your intent, but maybe consider this is some of the impact of that belief system, and I can share this is how I approach it. And what I find is if I can just share using I statements where I am with my belief, without a need to try to convert people, it has a better possibility of being seen not as an attack, but as an invitation into conversation and an invitation into relationship. And this is something that happened when I was in campus ministry, is I had lots of fundamentalist students and other folks, Christian fundamentalists, coming to me, deeply concerned, because I believe that people are created gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and who they are and what they're becoming is a gift from God. And they were deeply concerned that I was leading people to hell. And my reaction to that was, I think your concern and care for people is beautiful. I think it is incredibly damaging what that theology is doing to people. And on one level, I'm also moved that you would, take a risk of having a very difficult conversation with me, out of concern with what you think that I'm doing. Now, this is not what I think I'm doing. Here is why. This is why I think this is what love looks like. And I could also tell you the impact of this theology that I see happening. But it just is like I really, really try, and sometimes it's hard just not to demonize people. And I find that it's not up to me whether people are open to consider other ideas. I just need to make sure that I am.
I'll go. I think one thing that I've learned in my long and winding journey is that everybody's got them. Every faith tradition has their fundamentalists, and I hope this isn't dismissive or patronizing to any fundamentalists who are joining us today, but I really believe it kind of falls on a Myers-Briggs type in a way. I mean, I want to give people, the love that I think that comes from, there are some people who just really need a sense of certainty and security in their lives, maybe something they've been through, that they really need that one right answer. And I understand that need. I also understand that drive to share that one right answer is something that drove me away from let's say the faith community of my nativity. And so I was surprised as can be when I found it in Judaism as well, and have seen examples of it in other faiths. And I want to, I remember, if anybody has ever converted to a religion out there before, you've probably encountered what's called imposter syndrome. Do the other people in the religion see me as a real member, or do I see myself that way? And I remember I had this, I won't go into details, but I had this religious experience in Jerusalem. I know I'm not the first one, where all of that washed away, and I really felt secure in who I was. And I shared this with my rabbi who was visiting, and then he points to a guy behind me, which is a guy who in August in Jerusalem was in a full black coat and a black fur hat and a big hot beard, one of our fundamentalists. And my rabbi points to him and says, "Is he your brother?" That was a test for me, not for him. And I said, absolutely, no question. I'm less concerned about whether he sees me that way now than I used to be. But I have to see him as another Jew that I am responsible for. And so that's been kind of my inclination, is that I can love people in my family without agreeing with them. And by acknowledging, like I often say, conservative Judaism, we're like the Episcopalians of Jews. We're like more mainline. I just share that with my Episcopalian friends out there. So we have that, we have this kind of, not middle of the road, but we have a way that we feel comfortable with, and are in sometimes tense conversations with people who are of the same family but think very differently. And I think the more we can share fellowship. And I put myself in Orthodox spaces or in fundamentalist spaces, and I know the prayers too, and we could eat smoked fish together. The more we see each other as people, the more I see them as people, and vice versa, and the more good work we can get done.
Thank you. Alan, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. I mean, I run across those people. Some of them are immigrant Muslims. You know, they're a lot of what they want to express or hold on to is their cultural values. You know, I've been Muslim for 30 years, so I'm new, and I'm still learning and evolving as a person. And so some I take in, you know, but I just, and that's the way it is. It's me. And for a lot of people's idea, you know, I should be looking at you guys with a thobe on, sandals, and that would be appropriate for me this evening. But you know, I'm an American Muslim, and you know, this garb is appropriate for me, and work with it. It you know, it suits the things that I want to do and need to get done. You know, they're very fluent and they have different interpretations of the text of the Quran. But again, you know, I know Quran too. And so, you know, early on, you know, I was a little intimidated. But, you know, I've grown up and I stand on my 2 feet and you know.
Thank you. I can't believe it, but it's actually almost, well, where I am, it's almost 9 o'clock, which means it's almost 6 and it's almost 8 where Reverend Kinman is, if I'm doing my math properly. And I promised our crew that we would keep this to an hour, although I think we could talk all night because we have a list of questions that haven't been answered, and we prepped a whole other series of questions, but there's a Zoom fatigue that's going on, and I want to keep our word to this evening. So I just want to say thank you so much, because it's really interesting, and I feel like we could sit here all night. Incredibly interesting. So thank you for being willing to share with us so much, and because you know, it's beautiful what you said. And if for those of us who did ask questions that were not answered, I do apologize. It's just there's too many that were bubbling up. If anyone does want a copy of this, just email me directly and I'm happy. We're recording it, so I'll send it out. Just another house cleaning note. The next Interfaith Study Group webinar is Sunday, January the 10th from 5 to 6. We do not have a December one. And that the topic is going to be the concept of justice in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the invite will come out in the next few weeks because we have a little bit of time, but you always have to do an RSVP to attend. And the interfaith, the chair role, which I have had, is moving on to Carol Rader Maslin, who's a friend, and she's a member of PJTC. And I want to thank her for graciously taking on this role. Last week I moved back east and I'm sitting in New Jersey hosting, but in the future for the January one, I myself will be not on screen, but I'll be in the background listening. But I just want to say to everyone who's on, thank you so much. And on behalf of the Interfaith Study Group, thank you for making the time, to these 3 gentlemen for joining and for being a part of this and being a part of the Interfaith Study Group. And thank to all the attendees for making time to be with us tonight. Do you guys want to say anything before we sign off?
I just want to say thank you, Gail, for leading this, and for I know that you've been in transition, but for sticking to your responsibilities and making this a really wonderful panel, for bringing these 2 great guys and also me to this. And just want to shout out to some of my PJTC people, Rhonda and Carl and Susan and Ruth and so many others. Just really grateful to see our community here, to maybe meet some new friends. And I know we didn't all get all questions answered, but if anybody wants to follow with me, you can reach me through PJTC, and happy to continue these conversations however we can. Really honored to be with these gentlemen in particular. but mostly just grateful to you, Gail, and the Interfaith Study Group for convening this holy moment.
Thank you. I just want to say something. I think it'd be really interesting for Rabbi Carrier to talk about his Jerusalem experience alongside with Alan to talk about the Hajj. And I don't know, Mike, where you fit in, Reverend Mike, but I think that's a whole right topic of like the journey back to where it began on a spiritual, like that's part 2, but I think that could be remarkable.
That
Could
would be wonderful.
So Alan,
I just want to thank everybody. Again, Reverend King, good to see you again. Even by this Zoom, and Rabbi Carrier, it's always a blessing and pleasure to see you. I've been working with that Shabbat book you gave me. We have a lot in common there. And I want to thank the audience. And I also want to thank some friends that I saw in the attendance, Faraday, to Anne-Marie, to Bruce, to Deborah Ann, to Alma. Thank you again for taking the time to tune in.
Amen. I saw Alma there. We were talking about you earlier, and Alma and Randy and Doni and Carol and Catherine. I could keep going down the list of all the folks, all the All Saints folks who are there. Just thank you. And Gail, this was wonderful. It was an honor, and it was just a lot of fun. And I was just soaking in the stories. So let's do it again sometime.
yeah, I think part 2 is a real possibility. So
Absolutely.
I think that could be fascinating.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
Blessing.
again. Have a
You bet.
lovely evening, and Yasher Koach to everyone.
Okay.
Okay, good night.
That's Hebrew for high five.
That's right.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you.